Ever feel like you're drowning in information, but like not really absorbing what matters?
Yeah.
Today, we're going to help you, the learner, cut through all that. We're diving deep into something called cognitive load theory. It's all about how our brains handle new stuff, especially the kind you get in school or training. You know, the stuff we don't just pick up naturally,
Yeah.
biologically secondary knowledge.
Right.
And we're using excerpts from this article. The development of cognitive load theory. It talks about replication crises and how even other theories play a role.
Uh-huh. Theory expansion.
Yeah.
That's the key.
So today, we're finding out how cognitive load theory, evolved.
Mhm.
We'll see how even when experiments went a bit sideways, they actually made the theory stronger. So whether you're a hardcore student or just curious about your brain, we're going to keep it clear, no jargon. You'll get why this theory is important for learning anything well. Okay, so first things first. Where did this whole idea even come from?
Well, it started back in the early 1980s, some interesting experiments about problem solving. They gave university students these number puzzles. Think of it like you start with a number. Then you can only do two things, multiply by 3 or subtract 69.
Multiply by 3, subtract 69. Sounds tricky. So what happened? Did people magically become math geniuses?
Well, a lot of them did get good at reaching the target number. But here's the thing, and this is key for you. The learner, later on, they asked the students if they knew the underlying rule. It was actually just an alternating pattern of multiplying and then subtracting. But hardly anyone realized that. They could solve it without consciously understanding how.
That's wild. So they were getting the right answers but had no clue why. What did this mean for education then? Was the takeaway just make everyone do tons of puzzles?
Not exactly. It made people question, what's really the best way to learn? If people can solve problems without even knowing the principles behind them, does that mean problem solving is always the best way? It started this debate about direct instruction, just telling someone how to do something, versus letting them figure it out through problem solving. The point for you, the learner, is that getting the answer isn't the same as understanding. You might be doing a task without building knowledge that sticks. It's like you need to focus on the why along with the how.
Makes you think twice about how we learn, right? Maybe explaining the rule clearly would be better. So how did they explain what was going on in those students' brains, that disconnect between doing and understanding?
Well, that's where the model of our memory comes in. Cognitive load theory uses this model called the Atkinson and Shiffrin model. It basically says our memory has three parts: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is like a super fast snapshot of what we see and hear, but it fades quickly. We only remember if we pay attention, and then it goes to working memory. Working memory is where we think actively, like the RAM on your computer. It's fast but limited. And then there's long-term memory. That's where we store things for later, like a hard drive. Lots of space, but slower. For learning, working memory and long-term memory are the stars of the show.
Okay, so working memories are mental workspace and long-term memories are storage. Got it.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. Working memory has a tiny capacity, and it doesn't last long. So when those students were doing the puzzles, their working memory was totally full with trying to figure out the next step, multiply or subtract. They were so focused on that immediate problem that there wasn't any mental space left to think about the bigger pattern or rules. All their mental energy went to just getting to the next step, not understanding the whole process and storing it for later.
So they were so focused on each move, they missed the big picture. It really highlights how limited our mental workspace is, huh? Now, you mentioned that when experiments didn't go as planned, it actually helped cognitive load theory. Seems kind of backward. How can things going wrong make a theory better?
Well, it might seem weird, but those so-called failures were really important. Instead of just ignoring the evidence that didn't fit, researchers took those unexpected results and dug deeper. They asked, why didn't this work the way we thought? And this led to new discoveries about how learning works. They refined what they knew. Science often advances when we question our ideas, especially when we get surprising results.
So it wasn't that the experiments were bad, but that the initial understanding of learning was too simple.
Exactly. Early on, the theory wasn't detailed enough to explain all the different ways people learn. It needed to be refined. For instance, take one of the most famous findings in this whole field, the worked example effect.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. It's the idea that when you're learning something new, like algebra, it's better to study solved problems than to try solving them yourself, right?
Exactly. At first, lots of studies showed that seeing a worked example, like all the steps to solve for an equation, it reduced the load on your working memory. Instead of struggling and trying things out, you see the correct path. You can focus on understanding why each step works, not getting lost in trial and error.
Makes sense. You're seeing the right way to do it laid out step by step. But then the article talks about a replication crisis. What was that? Did worked examples suddenly stop being effective?
Well, researchers tried using worked examples with other types of problems, like geometry and kinematics,
Ah,
the physics of motion. And the results weren't always the same. Sometimes worked examples didn't help any more than just solving the problems yourself. It was a mystery. Why do they work so well for algebra, but not always for these other subjects? It challenged the whole idea of the worked example effect and even cognitive load theory itself.
so it worked in one area but not in others. How did they figure that out?
The key was in how the worked examples were presented. For algebra, the solution's usually linear, step by step, often as a series of equations. To understand each step, you mostly just look at the lines before and after. You don't need to juggle a bunch of different information all at once.
So each step's self-contained and builds on the one before it.
Right. But in geometry or physics, it's different. You often have a diagram showing the problem, and then separate text explaining the solution, referring to parts of the diagram. So to understand something like angle ABC is congruent to angle XYZ because of the alternate interior angles theorem, you have to keep looking back and forth between the text and the diagram, finding those angles, connecting them to the theorem. It's this constant mental jumping around. For you, the learner, if your material has a diagram in one place and the explanation somewhere else, your brain's working overtime just to connect them.
I see. It's not just understanding the steps, but also integrating the information from the diagram and the text. That sounds like it would use up a lot of mental energy.
It does. Your working memory has to hold both the visual and the text at the same time. And all that integration, it's extra cognitive load, not from the concept itself, but from how it's presented.
So how did they fix this split attention problem? Did they just ditch the diagrams? Those seem pretty important for geometry and physics.
No, they kept the diagrams. The solution was to integrate everything. Instead of having the diagram and text separate, they put labels and explanations right on the diagram itself, or used arrows and lines to connect specific parts of the diagram to the text. That way, you don't have to search for the connections. It reduces that extra cognitive load. And when they did this, the worked example effect came back. It showed that how you design learning materials has a huge impact on how well people learn.
That's amazing. A failure actually led to a deeper understanding of how we learn. But it doesn't end there, right? The article mentions another replication problem, this time with the split attention effect itself. It's like solving one mystery creates another.
Yeah, once they realized integrating diagrams and text was good, they thought maybe all diagrams and text should be integrated. But more experiments showed that wasn't true. Sometimes integrating actually made learning worse. Another unexpected result.
So just putting everything together wasn't the answer. What was going on?
They discovered something called the redundancy effect. Imagine a diagram of blood flow through the heart. Arrows show the direction, labels show each part. Now imagine adding text that says the exact same thing, like blood flows from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery, as indicated by the arrow. That text doesn't add anything new. The diagram already shows it perfectly. So for you, the learner, this means your brain's processing the same thing twice in different formats.
Right, like hearing the same instruction repeated word for word. Pointless.
Exactly. Having the same information in multiple formats just increases the load. Your brain's working harder than it needs to, and that extra processing can actually get in the way of understanding. In these cases, it's better to get rid of the redundant stuff, either the diagram or the text. The point is, it's not just about where the information is, but whether you need all of it.
That's a really subtle but important point. Now, what about the modality effect? The article talks about that too. It seems like we're covering all the ways to present information.
The modality effect basically says learning is better when visual information, like a diagram, is paired with audio, like someone explaining it out loud. Instead of having both the diagram and the explanation in written form, the idea is that our brains process visuals and sounds somewhat separately. If everything's visual, it overloads that part of your brain. But if you hear some of it, you spread the load, freeing up your visual processing for the diagram. Think of it like listening to directions while looking at a map. You're using both senses.
It's like sharing the mental workload, right? But I'm guessing this one had replication problems too.
Yep. Some studies even found a reverse modality effect. Learning was better when everything was visual, which totally contradicted the original idea.
A reverse effect, that's a complete flip. How did they explain that?
This is where the transient information effect comes in. Written text is permanent. You can reread it. But speech is fleeting. Once you hear it, it's gone. To understand complex speech, you have to hold it in your working memory while you keep listening. So if it's too long or too complicated, it overloads your working memory. Written text stays put, you can go back to it.
So a long, complicated explanation might be harder to follow than just reading it, even if there's a diagram. Your brain can't keep up with the spoken words.
Exactly. And guess what? When researchers used shorter, simpler audio that was synced up with the visual, the modality effect worked again. It shows how important the audio itself is, how long it is, how complex, how it relates to the visual.
It seems like with every principle, there was some new finding that made them refine the theory. Now, the article talks about element interactivity and the expertise reversal effect as a unifying concept. Does this tie all these findings together?
It does. Element interactivity is basically how connected the different pieces of information are. High interactivity means the elements are tightly linked. You have to process them all together to understand. Like in algebra, each part of the equation is connected. You can't just learn one piece in isolation.
So you can't just learn one step, you need to see how it relates to all the others.
Right. Low interactivity means you can learn things more separately, like vocabulary words. Each word and its definition can be learned on its own. But here's the key for you. The learner element interactivity changes depending on what you already know. Something complex for a beginner might be simple for an expert.
Like learning to drive. At first, every step is separate. Clutch, gear, gas. But an experienced driver does it all smoothly, as one action.
Exactly. And this difference leads to the expertise reversal effect. Things that help beginners might not help experts, and vice versa. For example, worked examples are great for beginners with high interactivity stuff. But for experts, they might be boring, even harmful. They might learn better by solving harder problems.
So worked examples aren't always the answer. It depends how much the learner already knows.
Right. This expertise reversal effect explains a lot of those replication failures. It wasn't that the theory was wrong, but that the learner's experience wasn't always considered. Now, cognitive load theory recognizes that element interactivity and expertise matter a lot. It helps explain why different learning methods work better in different situations.
It's fascinating how the theory kept building on those unexpected findings. Now, the article also talks about how ideas from other theories helped cognitive load theory.
Yeah, it hasn't developed in a vacuum. One big influence was Geary's evolutionary educational psychology.
Evolutionary psychology. What does evolution have to do with learning in a classroom?
Geary says there's a big difference between biologically primary knowledge and secondary knowledge. Primary knowledge is stuff our brains are wired to learn easily, like speaking, recognizing faces, basic social stuff. Secondary knowledge is important to our culture, but we haven't evolved to learn it easily, like reading, math, history. It needs to be taught. Think of that puzzle experiment. The underlying rule was secondary knowledge. Solving the steps was more primary.
So, primary knowledge is like our brain's built-in apps, and secondary knowledge is stuff we got to download through learning.
Exactly. And Geary says teaching methods that rely on minimal guidance and discovery learning don't work well for secondary knowledge. Because we don't have those built-in shortcuts, we need explicit instruction. It explains why we have schools to teach things we wouldn't just pick up on our own.
That changes the whole debate about direct instruction versus hands-on learning, doesn't it? It depends on what's being learned. What about that other theory, the one with the analogy to evolution by natural selection? That sounds pretty abstract.
It is. It was proposed by John Sweller and Richard Sweller. They say that how our brains learn complex new things is kind of like evolution. Think about it. When you try to solve a new problem, you come up with ideas and test them out, kind of like genetic mutations. Learning from others is like reproduction. Good ideas get passed on. Our working memory, being limited, is kind of like the epigenetic system in biology. It affects how genes are expressed. Long-term memory is like the genetic code itself, and retrieving information from memories like gene expression.
That's a really interesting parallel. So they're saying our cognitive system for learning operates on similar principles to evolution.
Exactly. And this strengthens cognitive load theory. It shows that its principles aren't random. They align with this powerful fundamental system that's been creating complexity and adaptation for ages. If learning is like evolution, then education should focus on building a rich store of knowledge in our long-term memory. It's like our cognitive genetic code. That's what allows us to think critically, solve problems, and be creative.
That's a fascinating connection between different fields. So where does cognitive load theory stand today? And what are researchers still looking into?
Well, cognitive load theory is pretty widely accepted now. Big educational organizations recommend it. There are books for teachers about how to use it. Research is still going on, though, like how working memory gets depleted and how rest and spacing out learning helps. Even some basic assumptions are being re-examined with new findings. It's a dynamic field.
So even though the basic ideas are solid, there's still more to discover.
Yeah, the idea that our working memory has limits is still central. But we keep learning more about how to work with those limits, often because of those early unexpected findings.
So for you, the learner, what are the key takeaways? What should you really remember?
Okay, first, remember, your working memory is limited. Don't try to process too much at once. Second, how information's presented matters a lot. Look for things that reduce the load. Avoid split attention and redundancy. Integrated diagrams and clear explanations are good. Third, understand that the complexity of what you're learning element interactivity affects how hard it is. And what's hard for a beginner might be easy for someone with experience. Lastly, the expertise reversal effect, what works for beginners might not work for experts. Cognitive load theory helps you think about how you learn and how others teach, especially for those things we don't just pick up naturally.
Knowing this stuff can really help you, the learner, take control of your own learning. You can recognize when learning materials are well designed or not. And for anyone who teaches, these insights are really valuable. You can create better, more engaging learning experiences.
Exactly. Being mindful of cognitive load theory can make learning easier, more effective, and less frustrating.
This has been a fascinating look at how a theory evolved and how those unexpected results actually led to some profound insights. So here's something to think about. If our learning process is kind of like evolution, what other fields might have clues about how we learn? Maybe looking at how information is transferred in other systems, biological, technological, even social, could lead to breakthroughs. Think about that and how cognitive load theory might apply to your own learning experiences. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.